Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor of ClassicsToday.com and certified Altercocker, which is the wonderful Yiddish/German term for old fart. Yeah, curmudgeonly older guy. Here to talk about ageism. Ageism in classical music, something that has occupied my mind as of late because it occurred to me. Well, let me tell you the story, and then we can have the chat that ensued. I had to find a new dentist lately, and so I did my usual research and called up a place nearby where I'm living because I had been doing dental work in New York, and now I'm in Connecticut, and I need a local guy, right? So I found this dentist, and I went to his office, and he came to meet me, and he looked like he was about 12 years old, and I was shocked, I have to say. Oh my goodness, he was this young guy, and I was immediately nervous and horrified. It's like, did he even know where teeth were? Had he even gotten his adult ones? Was he still waiting for the tooth fairy to show up and leave him a quarter under his pillow? I mean, it was just really an experience. But then it occurred to me, and I was talking about this with my mother, actually. I was talking about how, at some point in my life, now I'm 62 years old, things flipped. There was a time when, doctors and people you worked with who were professionals were older than you were. And you respected them because they were older and they conveyed a certain authority and certain wisdom. But now you get to a point where you're older than they are. And they all look like kids. And I can't remember exactly when that transition happened, when the shift happened. But it occurred to me, I mean, how is this relevant to anything that has to do with classical music? Well, it is. It is, because classical music is one of the few professions, if you want to call it that, or parts of business where the ageism thing is reversed. I mean, usually when you accuse someone of ageism, it's usually prejudice against older people. Preference for youth. And we're such a youth-oriented culture. And our heroes, pop singers and sports legends, I mean, they're all young. When they get older, they're all decrepit and falling apart and brain damaged and whatnot. So, so classical music is one of the few professions where the older you get, the more respect you're generally assumed and expertise you're assumed to have, and the more respect, therefore, you're entitled to. And I think, and I've done videos called To Hell with Young People, trying to explain that classical music is essentially the audience for classical music is an older audience. I mean, there's no question about that, right? We all know it. But despite the fact that we all know it, the entire classical music industry is still youth oriented. They're trying to create the next generation of listeners, and performing arts organizations are always running after kiddies, and everybody is still doing this, and the conductors, the Klaus Mekala, and this guy who I'm going to be talking about, this Tarmo Peltakowski, who looks like, he still is sleeping with stuffed animals. I mean, they're young and they get promoted like that. And I had to stop and take a step back and say, well, wait a minute. Just wait a minute. Yes, they're young, but people start in professions when they're young. They start when they're ready to start, and usually they're young. I mean, we can't be prejudiced against them because they're young. I mean, when I did my chats about Klaus Mekala, the Ken doll of classical music. I mean, I had people who say, well, these other conductors, Zubin Mehta and Michael Tilson Thomas and whatnot, they were only in their late 20s or early 30s when they took over major orchestras. And you were right. You were right to point that out. I mean, my argument about him wasn't that he was young and inexperienced because of his youth. My argument was that he was incompetent because his recordings sucked. I mean, it was based on listening. You have to make a decision after you listen. And the fact that he sucked, I mean, and was young, well, maybe it was youth and inexperience. You're going to attribute that logically to the appallingness of the result. That's always possible. But we cannot be prejudiced against young people in the arts because they're young. We should only hate them because they're bad and young. I mean, you can add that in and do both. But I couldn't help but just sort of have a chuckle because, we're classical music people are famously curmudgeonly, and prone to complain, and we're older. So maybe this is just a little, it's not a bad thing sometimes to see the tables turned and have the older generation getting the last laugh on the younger. And there is actually an argument, a real argument, I think a serious argument in favor of maturity in the universe of classical music. And that is that because the works that we play and the body of music that we have, the body of knowledge that's required to really give classical music its due, is vast. And bigness and vastness means it takes time. It just does. It takes time as listeners. I mean, when I do my talks to beginners, I say, first criterion to enjoy classical music is to give it time. Because if you listen to something that takes 45 minutes or an hour, or a Wagner opera, God knows, 4 hours, you got to make the time. It has to be something that means enough to you that you're willing to carve out a large chunk of your life and dedicate it to the act of listening. And not everybody is willing to do that or has the ability to do that. So yes, it takes time. And because it takes time, then eventually, once you really get to know it, you're going to find out all of a sudden that you're like, near retirement age. You're going to be in your 40s or 50s. You're going to be middle-aged. You're going to be further along in life than you need to be to simply, turn on the radio and listen to the latest pop song. I mean, it's just the nature of the beast. I mean, there is that element. The time element means that it is more targeted toward a more mature audience, or people who have more leisure time because they've achieved a certain stability in their lives and they have the time to indulge in it. But as far as the artists go, well, with age comes experience, not necessarily wisdom. Wisdom is not gifted to all, and we all know that there are whole fields of classical music and classical music performance. I'm thinking of you, opera singers, who are not necessarily the brightest bulbs in the chandelier. I found that out. I found that out the best possible way. I think I've told this story before when I was going to take music theory at the Peabody Conservatory, because I was an undergrad at Johns Hopkins and you could do that. And we had to take a placement exam, and I'm sitting there looking at the placement exam and eking my way through it as much as I could. And within the first 5 minutes, half of the people who were being tested just walked out. Totally walked out. And after about an hour of struggling through this thing, I handed it to the professor who was proctoring the thing. And I said, "Who were those people?" And he said, "Oh, those were all the voice majors." So there you go. They didn't care about music theory or music at all. They cared about the larynx. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, wisdom doesn't come to everybody, but experience does. Verdi once said, "I may not be a learned composer, but I'm a very experienced one." And that was very true. So experience takes time and it takes age. And with all of this, I mean, we're looking at all this stuff, to listen to it all, to take it in, to have a career like that. Well, I think you're justified in being skeptical about the claims to mastery of very, very young musicians. There's nothing wrong with that. And it's fun for us altacockers to have something to bitch and moan about. So there you have it. I mean, are we ageist? That's the question. I think sometimes yes. I think sometimes it's understandable. I think the classical music industry is certainly slanted towards those of more mature life experiences. But of course, you got to start. We need to encourage the young. There are always going to be prodigies and geniuses and people who suck up music in an astonishing way, and they should also be encouraged and respected. But the bottom line is, as I've always said, we have to keep on listening. We have to let our ears judge. And if something's great, doesn't matter who's doing it, doesn't matter how old they are. We can't prejudge simply because somebody may be of a certain age. We have to listen and take each performance as it comes and judge it on its own merits. So there you have it. That's my thought about the whole thing, and I'm interested to hear yours. Keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me, and take care.